I have the only relationship I have with Hurricon is a sponsorship relationship. I believe that there should be a college show. I believe that Yasumicon was a good show. I like Yasumicon. I believe that any anime club that wants to do something should do it. The Hurricon kids are great kids. They put on a show. They got the shaft by the school. I had for the first 2 years of their show, I had a very quiet sponsorship where I would give them stuff and I would support them and I would help them. And then this year they needed a little bit more help. So I wrote a check because I believe that their show should go on. Now hopefully next year they can go back to the school. If not, that's a discussion. But I don't have anything to do with their programming. I don't have anything to do with the running of the show other than they asked for some of my guys for security and we gave them video game stuff. It was 2006. Understand that I have gone to conventions in my entire life. So I went to conventions in the 80s in New York, in the mid to late 80s in Florida. I'd gone to Volcons, I'd gone to Great Eastern Cons, you name a show, I went to it. There were no shows in South Florida of any note in 2006. Now, prior to me, I'm friendly with Petey, who does Spooky Empire. Do you know that show? Okay, so I'm friendly with Petey, and I helped Petey get the show started back when it was Screamfest. So Petey did his first couple of shows in Fort Lauderdale or really Plantation. Then he decided in 2005 he was going to move the show to Orlando. It was a good show, and he had been bringing in a couple of guests, and he was now taking the show, moving it to Orlando, and there would not be that type of show in this town again. And so he and I were talking, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing my own show. He goes, well, as long as it's not a horror show. I said, yeah, I'm not going to do horror. You may notice that we don't really have a horror element to our show. And that goes back to that original agreement with Petey back in 05, 06. The start of this show, it's called Supercon because originally the first show had a very large Superman theme. Margot Kidder, Lois Lane, Noel Neal, the original Lois Lane, Jack Halloran, who was Non in Superman 2, Gerard Christopher, the Superboy. So I called it Supercon because there were Superman things going on. And at the time, Jimmy Pop had canceled his second show. ToonieCon had gone the way of the dodo bird. There was nothing. There was Yasumicon. Correct me if I'm wrong. I said you can't do. There had been that Mondo Pop show that Tate had done, and then Fernando and Seth had taken over, but that had gone away. They did that at the War Memorial. And I'm like, hey, let's do a show. And everybody said, oh, you can't do a show. Nobody's going to come. I'm like, well, let's try it. I'd never done a show before. I'd helped Petey with the Screamfest. So we ran the show. People came. I'm like, all right, well, let's do this again. And so now I had been a fan of anime early on. Now we're talking late 80s, early 90s when, Viz was publishing manga in comic book form. Before manga was really being translated over here, back when it was comic book companies translating the manga. And so I'm like, well, there's this huge anime audience. And so I started putting together the first anime Supercon, which was in April. And one of the, that was the first show I brought Dana Snyder into. And that weekend was the premiere of the Aqua Teen movie. And I mentioned that, and we did a big premiere with the Aqua Teen movie that weekend. I mentioned this because you'll notice that anime Supercon always had an animation influence. It was never just pure anime. And that's because of my interests. My interests are in both worlds. I really like animation as a genre. And I wanted to do a show that could cater to both universes, Western and Eastern animation. So Anime Supercon was around, and then I changed it to, we did a couple of those, and I changed it to Animation Supercon. in '09 when I had the big Futurama reunion, because it really wasn't it wasn't just a pure anime show. And I don't think it's fair to call it an anime. I don't think it's fair to call it a pure anime show if it's not. The name Anime Supercon didn't properly express what the show was. So then we changed it to Animation Supercon. And now Animate Miami is an extension of that. And the reason I call it Animate Miami is I don't want to have the Supercon name in it because I don't want to mix people up. Because people think when they were going to Anime or Animation Supercon, they were going to Supercon. And I can't give you the Supercon, without bringing in, the big comic book guests or the big media guests. So it doesn't make sense to have that in the name. Does that make sense? Magic City is new. It'll be in the old building. It will have a tighter guest list, but it will be a very similar show. Very similar. The rationale behind it is there are guests I can't get in July. Where every year we're 3 weeks out from San Diego Comic-Con. There are people that won't come because of San Diego, mainly comic guys. There are people that don't want to come to Miami in the summer. It's too hot. There are people that have family obligations on 4th of July weekend. Perfect example is Stephen Amell from Arrow. Has obligations. Can't come. So the hope is, based on my discussions with guests and celebrities, artists, etc., if we have a show in another part of the year, this opens it up and allows us to bring them in to people down here. Because other than Supercon or Animate or Magic City, you don't really have anybody bringing in these guests down here. I mean, Jimmy Pop brings in 1 or 2 voice actors. That's about it. I mean, other than you got MegaCon and Spooky in Orlando, and you got Tampa Bay and Tampa and MetroCon. But they don't bring in a lot of guests. They bring in like 5 or 6 voice actors. So I'm trying to cater to our community and bring in these people that I get requested for all the time. But they turn me down. People ask me all the time to bring in guests, and then they wonder why they're not coming. And it's a number of things. It's schedule conflicts. They want too much money. But a lot of it is they're just not available when I want them. But just so you know, we've been planning a November show for 6 months. Yeah. There was going to be a November show. Now, was it going to be Magic City or was it going to be Animate was a whole other story. We made the decision to move Animate into November and Magic City into January because having 2 Supercon-like shows, it's best, I think, to have it as far apart as possible. So you get a 6-month gap. You get a perfect gap between January and July. Okay. Then you got to find a home for Animate. Now, originally, I was offered the dates of the 23rd, which is the week after we're running, which was obviously Chibi Pie's dates. When I saw Chibi Pie had those dates, we decided not to run those dates. So then we look at other dates. So what dates are available? Well, I have to deal with a convention center that has a limited availability. Can't run the show on Thanksgiving. Can't run the show on Halloween. Don't want to run on the same weekend as we'll say Spooky Empire in October. Don't want to run the same weekend as other shows. So you got to find a date that's seemingly open. So the most open date was the date that we took.